Time for the Property Podcast, where every week tens of thousands of property investors, new and experienced, join together to get news, knowledge and laughs at our expense. With me, Rob Bence.
And me, Rob Dix. Join us every Thursday morning for your weekly dose of property ideas and motivation. Then head over to our website at thepropertypodcast.com to keep the conversation going. Now though, let's get started.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. It is episode 37. I'm Rob Bence. Good morning. And with me, as always, is the lovely Rob Dix. Good morning, Rob. How are you?
Good morning, Rob. I'm really well, thank you. I'm joining you from Barcelona this week. This week, we've got a really sort of detailed tactical episode, I think, because all the stories in the news are all about house prices being the highest ever and being going through the roof and everything else. And depending on where you live, that may or may not be true, but we're going to give you some really nice little tactical tips about some research you can do to figure out what exactly is going on with prices in your own area. And I think we've got one of the most addictive resources of the week we've ever featured.
Yeah, Rob introduced me to that just before the show and put the show back 10 minutes. So, and there's a couple of spin-off ones as well I think you'll enjoy. Make sure you stick with us for that one. But before we get going, we always like to acknowledge the people who've taken time to leave us a review. It's because of your reviews that this show is as popular as it is. So thank you so much to the following people. TGI says, extremely informative. The ongoing series of shows is a must for anyone getting involved in property for income. All the things in life and second opinion on major decisions is well worth listening to. These guys are knowledgeable and above all enthusiastic about the subject. Thanks for putting this together. Its popularity shows that there was a need for this show. Keep it going, fellas. Thank you, TGI. And Carzo, the newbie, says, tip top. Fantastic podcast. Thanks for all the tips. Very inspiring. Could you do a feature on how to minimize exposure to capital gains tax, please? Well, Carzo, we've done a podcast on tax, and maybe we can cover a more advanced episode in weeks to come as well, where we look at specific tactics. So thank you for the suggestion. And James at SJ Barker says, great podcast. Thanks so much, Rob and Rob, for the excellent podcast. It's really full of useful information, and I always find something in each podcast I haven't thought of before. Also, the resource of the week is fantastic. Keep up the good work. And I think you'll enjoy this week's resource of the week as well, James. So make sure you listen out for that one. Okay, thank you very much. But Rob, I know we've both been busy this week, but you've probably been slightly busier than the two of us, considering you moved major cities. Considering most people class a move as one of the most stressful things you can do in your life, you must be getting pretty good at it now.
Yeah, it's kind of an everyday thing, really. We moved to Barcelona this week. We had a really nice train journey over from Madrid, and we're going to be here for the next month. So far, it has rained absolutely non-stop, so do not be jealous of my jet-setting lifestyle at all at the moment. But yeah, it's going to be good when that finally eases off. But I've been taking advantage of the wet weather to stay in and put the finishing touches to my second book, which is finally done. It's off being edited now, so I'm sure I'll be talking about that more in the coming months. The other thing we've done this week, at the time of this episode airing, we will have done our webinar giving people a sneak peek behind the scenes of the Property Hub. At the time of recording, we haven't done it yet, so we have no idea how that went. We might have embarrassed ourselves horrendously, and we don't know it yet.
Yeah, it could be scandal in the papers, and we don't know. But hopefully that didn't happen, and our worst fears have come true, and everyone enjoyed the webinar. So to those who attended, we don't know who you are yet, but thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And what about you, Rob? You've been busy as well.
Yeah, so it's a strange time of year for the company, for RMP, because a lot of investors tend to switch off to investments and deals this time of the year. You know, your average everyday person, and understandably so, because of Christmas. Also, understandably, that's when we can really push to get better deals as well, because so many people have switched off to property. We are exceptionally busy at the moment. We've had investments going through. Some have been harder work than others. Thank you to all the people who persisted in a recent investment in Chesterfield. My God, did that drag on with all the legal side of things. We got there in the end, but it just shows you that sometimes, you know, having good professionals working for you on your side are worth their weight in gold. Sometimes you do an investment and you breeze through the contracts and you think, oh, what was that? And sometimes you've got to work at them a bit. This one we had to work for, but it was such a good deal. You know, I'm sure everyone will agree it was well worth the effort. Busy with investments going through, busy with investments coming online, but it's enjoyable. I may have a few more grey hairs, but it's been enjoyable. And, you know, I think that we will quieten down for the Christmas and New Year periods and then back on it in January.
Who knows, you might even get 2 consecutive days off at some point during that period if you're lucky.
But I'd love that. That'd be nice. This week, Rob, our news story is a serious one from The Telegraph. And it's Alan Titchmarsh has got an addiction. And no, it's not hardcore. It's a bit similar to ours. It's property, and property adverts in particular. So it appears we're not the only ones who love to procrastinate on Rightmove.
I'm just scanning the article now. Yeah, he's sort of really going off on a soliloquy about all the places he's looking at. I feel like he's in a slightly different market from me because he's talking about watermills and Georgian townhouses and tennis courts and stuff. But it's the same principle. He seems to be wasting as much time on there as I do.
Yeah, it does seem that way. It makes you feel good. And I think we might have to send him our resource of the week because I can see him wasting some time on that one too.
Definitely. Well, we'll link to that in the show notes, of course, if you want to read more about Alan Titchmarsh's new addiction. We've been without a news story for a couple of weeks. I'm glad we've come back with a corker. But let's move on now to our topic of the week, which this week we're calling Bubble or Bust, Cutting Through the Media Spin. And we have to give a shout out here to Richard Brown, who is a prolific tweeter and does some really great analysis of articles that he's come across. And it was his ideas that I based a blog post on, and we're now basing this episode on the blog post I wrote. So I'm going to go link to all those bits in the show notes so you can see where the ideas come from. The basic idea is this. All the papers are talking about this sort of headline figure from the Land Registry, which came out in September and said that house prices in the UK are up 3.4% on last year. But when you dig a bit deeper into it, you'll see that in London, house prices are up 9.3%. In lots of areas, they've actually decreased. In Hartlepool, I think that's one of the worst areas, house prices are actually down 9% on last year. And then within each area, there are, of course, going to be variations within different areas of each individual town. So as an investor, knowing the overall headline figure of the whole of the UK is meaningful in some way, but it doesn't really tell you what prices are doing in your area or in an area that you're looking at investing in. What we're going to do is give you some tips about some research you can do to figure out what's really happening down at street level in your area so you can get a good picture of what the market's like.
I'm so glad we're doing this episode, Rob, because since we started the podcast, it's barely 9 months old. And when we first started, the papers were still loving the doom and the gloom, telling us all how terrible it was. And in the space of 9 months, it's gone full cycle. And now the property market is I'm trying to think of something sexy, but chocolate. It's the sexiest thing since chocolate. They won't shut up about how brilliant property is now and how everyone's going to be rich on property prices. There's no middle ground. There's no, properties doing quite well, which it was doing when we started the podcast, and it still is now. The media is full of extremes, and I think this podcast will really help you cut through the bull and see exactly where things are at.
Yeah, exactly. I remember in our first few episodes, we were sort of doing all these news stories, and at the end of it, no, it's all right. It's not all bad. Honestly, it's fine. And now we're kind of maybe going the opposite way and having to talk it down a bit. So let's get into the first tip, which is using one of our favorite tools, Rightmove, to check how active the market is. To get a measure of activity, one thing you can do, which is a tip that I picked up from Richard Brown, is go to Rightmove, select the area that you're looking at, and first look at properties that are for sale, not including sold subject to contract. Then do the search again, which includes the sold subject to contract. And that'll give you a ratio of the number of properties that are available versus the numbers that have been sold recently. So this can be a really good tool for comparing to areas and seeing how active their markets are compared to each other. So, for example, in London W4 postcode, out of every 2 properties, one of them will already be marked as sold subject to contract. In Birmingham, B68 on the outskirts of Birmingham, out of every 5 properties, only one of them will be sold subject to contract and 4 of them will still be for sale. What that tells us is that the market in Birmingham is weaker than it is in London at the moment. In London, there's not a lot on the market, or everything that is on the market is being snapped up. Whereas in Birmingham, there's quite a lot of supply and that stock isn't being snapped up so quickly. So that's quite a useful measure of activity, which you can then use as a starting point to delve into actual prices on the ground.
Okay, so we've got Rightmove, which is a fantastic tool, but we've also got Zoopla, and Zoopla is a great tool as well. Now, you can use Zoopla to look at the property prices and what's happening in your area too. So a simple way of doing this is one of the things we use in our due diligence at RMP in the Big 50 report is we can get a graph of a postcode's performance, property price performance in that area. So rather than looking at city level or national level, we can actually get down to a postcode and see how the prices have performed and see them in different graph forms. So that's really interesting. Another way of using it, and this is a new one on me, so I found this quite interesting, is you can go in, and we'll put the link in the show notes so you can get to this page directly. Look at the agents in your local area, and it tells you how they've performed. What I mean by that is how quickly they're turning over property on average. Are they taking 8 weeks or are they taking 16? It's a huge difference. So by seeing how fast the agents are moving in one area to another will give you an idea of how the stock is performing. Is it sitting on the market forever and nothing's moving? So there's a lot for sale, but not lots of activity. Or is the market really buoyant? Maybe comparing it to some postcodes in London. Well, if you're looking outside of London, we'll give you an idea. Have a look at the postcode house prices. That's a very useful tool. And also dig a little bit deeper. If you're interested in a particular area, you can look at the agents and see how often they're turning over property. I think that's a great tool.
Yeah, I didn't realize that information was there on Zoopla. That's really interesting. The number 3, look at the change in prices over the last year. So this is something you can do on both Rightmove and Zoopla. I tend to use Rightmove for it, but they both give you roughly the same information. They both pull information from the land registry, and you can use that to look over the last 12 months and look for indications of price increases. You can put in a postcode and see what it's done over time. If you look at the last year, you might see some indications that prices are firming up or starting to increase. It's a useful thing to do. It's a useful exercise. It's worth doing, but you do have to bear in mind that the data can be quite far out of date. So land registry data is always 3 months behind at least. So it doesn't give you an absolute current viewpoint. So if you're in an area where things are changing very rapidly, that won't give you a full picture. But it's still worth doing to give you a rough idea. And then from there, if you're just looking at lots of different areas to try and decide where to focus in on, that can be your broad measure. And then you can focus in a little bit more.
So next up is search for evidence of prices being reduced. Once you've performed a search on Zoopla, you can actually filter it to show you different scenarios. And one of the things you can do is search for most reduced. So property prices, what they were originally and what have they come down to. If a large number of properties have had their prices reduced by big amounts, and that's a sign of a weak market. Now, at first, of course, you're not going to have any comparables. So how's this area performing to another? So keep checking that particular area if it's one that you're focusing on to get an idea. And soon you'll start to see a pattern emerging. But also you can compare it to other areas you're interested in as well. If an area has very little in a way of reductions, then it probably shows a very vibrant market. And it's probably an area where things are starting to move on in terms of pricing. A very interesting way of looking at it. One that's not going to give you answers straight away, but if you're focused on that area or maybe you're in the research stage, then maybe you want to start doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm going to have to hang up my property geek title because I had no idea that on Zoopla you could search by most reduced. That's just really interesting in itself. Number 5, try to find the average discount from the market price. Now, this is something that you can't do anywhere online. There's no source where you can actually compare what properties are being sold for versus what they are being advertised for. I wish you could, but there's no way you can find that. But what you can do is try and get friendly with local agents, and they might tell you what kind of offers are being accepted at the moment. So you have to get out on the ground and do this and make some friends, but it's worth doing, and you might be able to get a bit of local intelligence. And this is really important because, again, there are so many variations. Like in London, I was talking to a friend the other day who had cash offers over the asking price refused. And that's just something that's like, wow, this is like last happening in 2006 or whatever it was. But in London, it's happening again. In other parts of the country, that's a million miles away from the reality. Rather than just looking in the papers and sort of using anecdotal evidence, you have to get out there and see what's really happening by talking to local agents. One thing you can do online is you can check auction websites and see what lots are being sold for and compare that against the comparable that's currently being advertised on the open market. And that'll give you some kind of measure. But of course, if a property's in auction, there's a good chance that there's something wrong with it, something that is stopping it from being sold on the market. You don't know necessarily what those faults are, and that makes it difficult to compare legitimately with something that's being sold through an agent, but it might give you some kind of measure. The best thing to do, though, is to go out, make friends with some agents, and see what they're saying.
If you're focusing on a very specific area, and that's likely to be the only area you will ever invest in, then building up on those relationships are worth the weight in gold. We talk about working with experts and, estate agents, whether you love them or loathe them, are experts in their local area at selling property. So it's worth building those relationships up. And that leads into our next point, which again is working with local estate agents to find out how quickly properties are completing in your area. So what I mean by that is from when you put an offer in to when the transaction actually completes, how long is that process taking? Because if the process is very short, it's probably a sign that that market is very competitive and people are competing quickly to make sure they get their deal. Whereas if the market is sluggish and it seems to be the agents suggest that things are taking months to go through, then it could be that the market isn't moving as rapidly as some other areas. It could be terrible solicitors, and that's certainly a possibility, but it could be a sign. So it's not the be all and end all. Don't base all your decisions on this. But again, it's just building that picture. It's another thing you can do to get a better idea. So ask the question, find out how quickly things are turning over in your area, and it'll start to give you an idea of what's happening.
And then we've been talking about prices and everything so far, deciding whether you want to acquire a property, but then once you've acquired it, you'll want to be renting it out, of course. So you wanted to see how buoyant the rental market is. And this links us back to the start as well, because at the start, I talked about how you can look at the ratio of properties that have been sold versus the ones that are still being advertised for sale. And you can do a similar thing on the letting side. So you can compare the ratio of rental properties available to properties that are let agreed already. And that'll give you a bit of an indication about what the supply situation is like. You can see how many properties are on there in general, and you can see how many of them are still available versus those that have been let out. That'll give you indications about things like if there's an oversupply of a certain type of property. So if there are tens of 2-bed flats and only a couple of them have been let agreed, maybe that's telling you that there's an oversupply. So even if you can buy one at a great price, you might struggle to let it out unless there's something particularly good about it. Another thing you can do, on Zoopla, we talked about looking at the list of local agents, and we're going to put the link in the show notes that takes you straight through to the page where you can do that. In the same way that you can see how long they're taking to turn over their sales stock, you can see the age of their rental stock as well. So as well as telling you which agents are more successful in the area, the average will give you an idea of how quickly properties are being snapped up to rent. And that's really important because, of course, you don't want to be buying somewhere and then sitting there for 2-3 months waiting for it to be rented out while it's costing you money. So that's 7 things you can do in there, some of them online, some of them offline, to really get down from the kind of the big national broad figure level down to the individual street level and see what's happening either in the area where you already invest, or do it for a few areas to decide where might be worth looking into a little bit more.
I really enjoyed that topic, Rob, because you've put it together with the information that you got from Richard Brown. I've picked up stuff. So it's, I've learned from this podcast. So I hope you've enjoyed it. It's some really interesting tools and ways to really dig down into the detail and the research, something that we both love doing. And I know many of our listeners do from what you've fed back to us. So I'm sure you can use some of those little tricks that maybe not be obvious at first. And I'm certainly going to implement them into some of the research we do. So yeah, I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, we try and have a balance of big picture stuff and detailed tactical stuff. And that was one of the latter. And of course, for all the links to the specific tools and pages that we've mentioned, get over to thepropertypodcast.com because everything, as ever, is in the show notes for you.
Super. Okay, so moving on to our resource of the week. And Rob, I'll let you take this one because you've brought it to my attention and you've probably lost me a few hours this coming week.
Yeah, this is a great one. So I can't remember where I first saw this. I think a couple of people were sharing it on Facebook. But it's called How Much Is That House? The URL is kind of a weird one, so the link will be in the show notes, but only go over there and click on that link if you've got an hour to spare, because it's really addictive. The concept is a game where it'll show you the outside of a property on Google Street View, and you have to guess how much it sold for. It just flashes up property to you. All it shows you is the outside and the area that it's in, and you have to guess the price. And then once you've guessed, it tells you the actual price, and you get points for how close you are. Last time I played it, I think I got something like 64% accuracy. I don't have anything to compare that to, so I don't know whether that's good or not. So, Rob, I'm looking forward to you having a go.
I'm going to tell you, Rob, because I'm in the middle of playing it right now. So by the end of the show, I'm going to tell you what I got. I'm just looking at it as attached house in Wandsworth, so I'll tell you how I've gone on by the time we finish the show, if there's not a million. But what I love about this tool, there's actually a few spin-offs they've done as well of games that you can play. And these are all for free, so it's really good fun. And the other games they've got is How Much Are You Hated by the Daily Mail? and Jaws the Text Adventure, and quiz, guess Sainsbury's next product. Have a look. There's plenty of time to be wasted there. I'm sure if you have got 10 minutes to spare, then great, have a go in it. And if you haven't, please don't go to this resource because you're going to lose it. You're going to lose some time. But yeah, it's a good fun one, Rob. I'm glad you brought this one to my attention. Well, I don't know if I'll be glad in a week, but I'm glad right now.
Yeah, disclaimer, the Property Podcast cannot be held responsible for the decline of your career, relationships, or anything else as a result of the time you're spending on this resource. Go over to the show notes, check it out, and leave a comment with your score, and we'll see how we all stack up. But Rob, while you finish the game, maybe I should talk about what's coming up next week. So next week, we've got an episode called Can You Use Your Pension to Invest in Property? This is something that Rob B knows a lot about. I don't know quite so much, but I'm looking forward to learning more. And it's something that we get asked about a lot. I've had a lot of emails about this. People sort of realizing that their pension might not provide for them in the way they want and want to know if they can use property as a way of boosting their returns. So that's going to be next week. I'm looking forward to that one. In the meantime...
Scores in, everyone. 88%. Your rating?
Oh, wow.
Kirsty and Phil. See, there you go, guys. It's not a load of bull. I do my research.
That's impressive, especially as you're only half doing it.
I'll screenshot it so it's not me making it up.
Yeah, that's the number to beat.
I'm going to tweet the score, actually. It says you can tweet your score. So if you follow my profile at Rob Bentz, go back and you can see the proof will be there.
That is some impressive stuff.
There you go, guys. Proof. You can listen to what I say about valuations of a fun game. Clearly, that's all the evidence you need.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Rob, but I just had to finish that game.
Yeah, no, quite right. I'm suitably impressed. I don't know how we can top that, so we should probably wrap the episode up there. But just say that if you haven't left a review for us on iTunes yet, please do. We are reading them all out. We're a little bit behind because we've had so many, but we can always have more, and we love to hear from you. So please get over to iTunes and leave us a review if you haven't done already. Yeah, please do. You've made us the most popular business podcast on iTunes because of your reviews. So if you can send some more our way so we can catch up on some of Radio 4's prime time, listened to by millions. We've got a few thousand to go, but you've got to have a goal. Okay, Rob, we'll see you again next week. Super. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. Make sure you join our mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com. And remember, we love 5-star reviews. Rob even loves them more than air miles.